Join me as we learn Chitas together, Chumash 4, Monday, Parshas Bay, the second Torah reading for Parshas Bay. Chapter 10, verse 12. Yesterday's Torah reading we read as Moshe warned Pharaoh about the upcoming impending plague of locust. Pharaoh was first concerned by his servants, especially who were worried about it, as Egypt is already in disarray. Pharaoh tries to bargain. Moshe says, no, everybody will have to go. Today's Torah reading begins where Moshe then strikes Egypt, and God strikes Egypt with the plague of locust. Verse 12. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and God said to Moshe, "Netei yodcha l'eretz Mitzrayim, raise your hand over your arm over Egypt. The arba with locust. V'yal l'eretz Mitzrayim, and the locust shall come up over Egypt. V'yochel es kol esav ha'aretz, and they will eat the grass of the land. Es kol asher hishir abaret, everything that was left over from the hail." Ba'arba, what does it mean, ba'arba? So Rashi explains, bishvil makas arba, you're going to lift your arm because as this will bring the plague of locust. Verse 13, Vayet Moshe Mateu, and Moshe raised the staff, Aleret Mitzrayim, on the land of Egypt, V'Hashem niag ruach kodim, and God directed the east wind, al ha'oretz on the land, kol ha'yemahu, that entire day, v'chol halayla, and the entire night, haboiker hoya, the morning came, v'ruach hakodim nosas ha'arba, and the east wind carried the locust into the country. Rashi, v'ruach hakodim, ruach mizrachis, the east wind which blows from east to west, blew the locust from the desert which is on the east side of the land of Israel. Nosas ha'arba carried the locust and brought it to the land of Egypt. Lafi, Sheba kinegdoi, shemitzrayim b'droimus maravis. It's coming from the opposite side because Egypt is on the southern southwest tip of Israel. It's explained in another place in the book of Numbers. Verse 14. Vayala arbal kol eretz Mitzrayim, and the locusts came all over the land of Egypt. Vayonach b'chil gvul Mitzrayim, and rested in the territory of Egypt. Kavid miyoid, it was a very difficult one. It was very severe. Fun of Lehoya Kain Arba, before it was never such a great locust, the Kamoyud like it, Va'achrav Liya Kain, and will never again be like it in such devastation from the locust. Rashi Va'achrav Liya Kain, how can we find that later on in the time of Joel, as it's discussed in Joel 2, there was a time that there was a locust as well. Shenemar al Kamoyul, there was never such a thing ever in the world. Seemingly, it looks like it was worse. It was more severe than the time of Moses. So he explains as that locust was different. Because in the time of Joel, it was more severe. There were many different kinds of locusts at the time. Arba, Yelek, Chasil, Gezem, 4 different kinds of locusts at the time. Aval Shal Moshe. However, in the time of Moses, there was only one kind of locust, and such a kind of type of locust that there was only one species of locust. That was only in the time of Moses, and never again for it to happen. Verse 15. And they covered the entire surface of the land, and the land became dark because there was so much locust, and it ate the entire grass of the land. V'eskol priya ate and all the fruits of the trees, asher hoiser abada, that the hail left over. V'leinisar kol yerek be'etz, there was no greenery left on any tree, ube'esav hasador, in the grass of the land, b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, in all of Egypt. Verse 15, kol yerek, Allah yorik, that means greenery that was on the trees, the same way there was greenery on grass as well, any greenery that was on the tree was all gone. Verse 17. Paro hastily summoned Moses and Aaron. And he says, I have sinned against God, Elekechem, your God, v'lechem, and against you. Verse 17. Now please forgive me. Achapam, just this time. And please entreat God. Ask Hashem, v'yoser me'alai, and He should be able to remove from amongst me, erakas hamavas hazeh, just to remove this death from me. Verse 18, vayetze me'im parei, And Moshe left Pharaoh's palace, Pharaoh's presence, Vayeter al Hashem, and he pleaded with God to remove the locust. Verse 19, Vayafich Hashem ruach yam, and God thereupon reversed the wind's direction. If you recall, last time the wind came from the east, so now the very strong wind, ruach yam chazak, a very strong west wind came, the oid, very strong, vayisas arba, and it then carried away the locust, vayitzakeyu yamosuf, and it plunged it into the sea of reeds. Le'nishar arba echad, not one single locust remained, b'chol gvul Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt's borders. Ruach yam, a west wind. Rashi says, Ruach Maravi, a wind that was coming from the west. Yamosuf, what does it mean, Yamosuf, in the Sea of Reeds? So Rashi explains as follows. If you look, as we're going to explain, there was a long sea, and what he's referring to over here is the sea that was there and how he's referring to what it means. Oimerani, I say, Sheyamsuf, that the Sea of Reeds wasn't all on one side. Hoya Miktsase b'mayrav, some of it was on the west. Keneget kol ruach deremis, according to the whole south side. Ugam b'mizracha shel Eretz Yisrael, which was also the east side of the land of Israel. Therefore, when he talks about over here, ruach yam, the west wind that's coming, the wind that's coming from west to east that carried the locust from the land of Egypt, utkoila arbe b'yamasuf, and then threw it into the sea, and the Sea of Reeds, connected, which is opposing it, because it would be on the east side of the desert. So too we find Linyan Tchumim when it talks about the measurements and the properties of where the land of Israel was going to be. So he says, Shehu, he talks about the Sea of Reeds, Paina Litzad Mizrach, goes towards east. Shenemer, as he says in verse, in later on, Shatias Kvulchan, I'll give you your place, Miam Suf ad Yam Plishtim, from the Sea of Reeds till the Sea of the Plishtim, meaning Mimizrach Lemayrav, going east to west. Because Sheyam Plishtim b'mayrav Haya, the Sea of the Plishtim was on the west. Shenemer b'Plishtim yeshvich Havalayam gekresim, because it says in Safanya that the Plishtim was sitting on the west. So if he's telling us that he's giving us from the Sea of Reeds, which goes along the eastern, from east to west, which was on the southern border. Le'nishar arba echad, it wasn't left one locust. She'afa maluchim shemol chabem. When the Egyptians were looking for food, they took the locust and they tried pickling them. So when the Torah tells us that not one locust was left, even those that were pickled disappeared as well. Verse 20, now, but once again, after the locust is all gone, God strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not send the Jewish people out of Egypt. Verse 21, now we continue on to the plague, the ninth plague of darkness. And God says to Moshe, put your hand raise your arm towards the sky, and let there be darkness upon all of Egypt. And the darkness was palpable. Verse 21. Why does it? What's the difference between that? There should be darkness, and there was a palpable kind of darkness. So he explains as follows: and he'll make it dark. A darker darkness than it was than a usual night. That means it's going to be dark as it is usually dark at night, but this will even be darker than that one will not be able to differentiate the difference between day and night as well. V'yamish k'moi, what is the word v'yamish? K'moi v'yamish, something which is palpable, something you can touch. We have many words, chaserus aleph, which are missing a aleph, because generally it should be vaye omesh, but the aleph is missing here, and therefore becomes vayomish. Aleph nikeres kol kach. Generally, aleph is one of the silent letters that if it's in the middle of a word, it will not be that noticeable or pronounced. Therefore, in akosef makbid al chasreino. Therefore, the Torah is not particular to put the word there. So if you have the word vayomish, even though sometimes it would have an aleph, not always would it have the aleph, because the aleph is silent and not pronounced. K'moi v'lo yahal shem aravi. He's giving some other examples where there are aleph in the middle of a word, and at times they're pronounced, and at times they're not pronounced. For Unclus Targim, however, the Unclus explains, Lashon Hasara, from the word remove, Lo Yamush, that one cannot remove, Basar de Yade Kavalele. After the darkness of night, then it came even a darker part of night. When it would come closer to the night, the light of day, then that means as the darkness would finish, then another darkness would come when it was supposed to become light. A new darkness came. However, it doesn't fit with the word viyamish, and it became dark. Because it says afterwards, and it was darkness again. Medrash Agada Paisrei. However, the Medrash explains it this way: Loshin v'mimamish, like to touch around. That it was so dark that the word v'yamish comes from the word palpable. They were able to touch it, and that's what the Medrash says. One was able to touch the darkness that was there at the time. The Torah then continues in verse 22. Moshe raised his hand towards the sky, and it was a opaque darkness. Abechol Eretz Mitzrayim, in the entire part of Egypt, shloishes yamim for 3 days. Rashi tells us, an opaque darkness, a darker darkness than there is on the usual night. Not only that, if one did not see another fellow, those 3 days. And even more so, why does he say 3 days that they weren't able to stand up? The other 3 days, was even a worse darkness. It was a double dark. And there means there were 3 parts. There were 2 parts of this plague. The first 3 days was just darker than a regular night. The second part of it was that one was not even able to move. That if you were sitting, you couldn't stand. If you were standing, you couldn't sit. Why did God bring them such a difficult darkness? Why darkness? There were people in that generation who were evil, saying that because they were very close to the Egyptians and they had their money, their honor, they didn't want to leave Egypt. And they didn't want to go out. They were very happy and content with what they were getting in exile. And they all died in the 3 days of darkness. Being that the Egyptians should not see that the Jews were dying. And then they will say, look, they're also getting struck like us. And therefore, God hid it from them and allowed them and made the plague of darkness that they should be buried at that time. Another reason why it had to be dark at that time. Another reason was that the Jewish people should go and snoop and look around and scout the homes of the Egyptians and see what's there. Like this, when it comes time to leave Egypt, they can ask the Egyptians for the wealth. The Egyptians can deny and say, we don't have anything. Like this, the Jewish people will respond and say, no, we saw it exactly in that closet, the top drawer. You put it over there. I know exactly where everything is, and therefore they will not be able to deny it. Shloishes yamim, 3 days. Shilus shel yamim, 3 days. Each 3 days was considered an entire time on its own. Tereitzna, like a third of days. When it talks about 7 days, which means a week, it means a group of 3 days. Verse 24. This we now concluded about the concept of the darkness. And over here we see that this miraculous event of the darkness, that the Jewish people were able to enjoy and seeing what the Egyptians had. This concludes the second Aliyah for Monday, Parshas Bo.